The use of smart contracts in dApps development. What lies ahead for the development of smart contracts within decentralized applications? Johan Zammit, Smart Studios. Aaron Anderson, Web2 Devs. Chris Craven, Blockchip. Moderated by Adel Elmessiry, Odem.
Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you had a little bit of rest last night. It's very exciting to be here, and my name is Adel Elmessiry. I am the Chief Technology Mentor of Odem, and I have a PhD in Machine Learning, Artificial Intelligence, and published papers in blockchain. It's fascinating to understand how it works, and the quintessential piece of blockchain is, of course, the smart contracts. So the first thing that we come to understand and dismantle about smart contracts is how they work. And before we get into that, I'd like to introduce my panelists. So if you can introduce yourself.
I'm Aaron Anderson. I'm a co-founder of Web3 Devs. We create distributed applications for a variety of clients. We take client work and customize a solution for their use case.
Hi there, I'm Chris Craven. I'm here with Blockchip, and we're developing a blockchain platform with a new consensus protocol that has 0 transaction fees. And one of the ways we're managing to achieve that is by replacing the role of miners with businesses and dApps.
Hi, good morning. I'm Johan Zammit. I'm the founder and CEO of Smart Studios. We help organizations with their business ventures in designing, implementing, and taking the business ventures to market.
I'm Lee Smith. I'm the Chief dApp Architect of Odem with Adel.
All right, gentlemen, so the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about smart contracts, the definition. Are they legal contracts? Are they smart?
In my opinion, smart contracts are really more like agents as opposed to a contract. You give them some instructions to handle some operations on your behalf. Where I'm from in Tennessee, the legislature actually recognizes smart contracts as legally binding. But if a smart contract's doing what it should be self-executing and not actually have to go to arbitration.
And the way I look at it, a smart contract, it's basically just the ability to write code that executes itself. And so the contract is only as smart as the code that makes it up. In terms of it being legally binding or a contract, contracts really are just promises. You write down that you'll promise you can do something, and then if you don't do it, a man with a stick comes and makes you do it. With smart contracts, the really exciting thing is you don't need that arbitration because they're self-enforcing. They execute themselves. So that's my take on it.
I think it's a very good question, Adel, first of all. If you take smart contracts as just a piece of code running on a blockchain, the answer would be no, they are not legally binding. However, as Aaron said, there are countries in the world, including a set of states in the US, California, Tennessee, Arizona, Delaware, and also, for example, the laws that passed in Malta yesterday, they acknowledged what a smart contract is. So that's the initial answer. It's a very hot topic. Earlier this year, there was a survey. They asked actually lawyers what they thought, and 40% said yes, they are. 20 said no, and 40 said we don't know. So,
Yeah, so to that question, are they? I think that's definitely up to the lawyers. Could they be? I think the answer is sure. That's the entire point here, right? Is, to Chris's point, we can execute programs that we've built, and we can do so in a distributed and verifiable way. And that will give you the foundation to actually create a contract and execute it.
And as you mentioned, there is countries that actually are working on a legal framework so that they would make it into the law. Malta included, actually, in trying to get those out, as well as there are works out there for a framework that would create a legal layer on top of the smart contracts so that you can do it in a way that would withstand it being put in court. With that said, then the biggest question next is, are all contracts the same? Are they created equally? Do we think there are different types of contracts?
So in my opinion, I see two categories for smart contracts. You have your library contracts that Open Zeppelin has done a real good job of making some standard smart contracts that are tested, that are resources for everybody. And then you have your custom contracts whenever you reach out to folks like us to build you a solution out. We're going to be using these library contracts to build custom contracts. And you have some functional contracts that provide a way to handle data, but the majority of what you want from a contract is the agency aspect. It's going to manage who has permissions to do what they need to do, keep tallies of people's ERC20 tokens, and just act on the behalf of the application itself.
I think dividing like that is an excellent way of putting it, kind of giving it that taxonomy. I would subdivide it even further, because you could ask a similar question of how many types of programs are there? How many types of computer programs are there? And as they're Turing complete, there's essentially an infinite variety. So I think the way I like to look at it is, what are the use cases of the smart contracts? Like in the previous thing, don't talk about blockchain, talk about what they can do. And in terms of the use cases of smart contracts, pretty much anything where you want a program that's going to execute itself, or you want to make an agreement, I think there's a use and a type of smart contract to be had.
Yeah, I think you can, following what Chris said, you can take it either by the use cases of smart contracts, or else by the blockchain that they run on. So there are differences between the smart contracts that run on Ethereum, those that run on EOS. We also have, although to a lesser extent, smart contracts that run on the Bitcoin blockchain. So there is a technical difference, but then there are the million and one ways of using smart contracts in different industries. We're using them for voting. We're using them for any kind of registries and insurance. So there are these two differences.
To Johan's point, I think the way that at least I look at it is very much in terms of what the blockchain technology is offering in terms of capabilities and Turing completeness, essentially. So I think that's probably like, if, for instance, if you zoom in on Ethereum, within the ecosystem there, all of those things are basically the same, right? They're all running on the same virtual machine. They're executing the same instructions. Yeah, I think that in that sense, it's much easier to look at it in terms of capability of the system, because that will describe what contracts you can actually build on that chain, right? Like Ethereum being Turing complete, EOS as well. You can write basically any program that exists if you're willing to pay to execute it. That doesn't necessarily exist on other chains, like, for instance, Bitcoin, where you can't, it's not Turing complete. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's a really solid way of looking at the differences in the capabilities.
It's an all interesting point here that the smart contracts actually came out from necessity to be able of actually using the blockchain for something practical. So that was the inspiration for Ethereum to actually come into existence, because it was so difficult to use the blockchain that underpins Bitcoin to actually create something meaningful. And hence, that leads us to the question, how are we using it? I mean, we talked about the fundamentals of it, but maybe each one of you can give us a little bit of light on how you're actually using it in your project.
So because I do client work and all my projects are different, the use case in each application is different. Whenever I do hackathons, sometimes I'll build a smart contract out to handle the agency. a client may require a dApp to be built with no use of smart contracts at all, but still doing the functionality or using some of those lessons learned in architecture that we use in Ethereum. Whenever I'm building out a, say like a WordPress plugin for a client who needs to allow their customer base to interact with their ERC20 token, I'll write out the smart contract, audit it, test it, deploy it to a test net, and then build out a front end to just speak to that API, and it will grab the Web3 and the address from the client so it can identify them. So a client can interact with the application without doing login and still managing their records using the database. So it really does allow for plug-and-play modularity for these things, especially within WordPress, for example, with the plugin architecture.
So for us, there's kind of two halves to what we're doing with smart contracts. For the blockchain platform itself, as I said, we're replacing the role of miners with businesses and dApps. So we're working with businesses and developers because they're having a huge variety of smart contracts for their own different businesses and dApps that'll be on it. For Blockchip itself, the way they're being used is to mediate the games that are running on Blockchip and with the game developers. So people will interact with the smart contracts to play those games, and then the revenue from the games will then be shared with the correct people via the smart contracts. So it's quite simple, really, in that regard, but a wide variety on the platform itself.
For us, one of the main aspects that we, earlier this year, we tried to tackle is actually the legal part, the understanding whether smart contracts are legal. So we worked on a product by which two organizations or two persons can go into an agreement without knowing any single line of solidity or of smart contract coding. And the product produces both a document where there are their signatures and also a smart contract with their digital signatures. So it's still a very evolving environment, but very, very, very interesting. One point I would like to add is that whether they are legal or not is the digital identity. It's all about whether you can identify the person who is actually leading. And the laws, depending on how the laws of e-commerce with digital signatures are, can define whether a smart contract is legal or not. Having said that, on the client side, we receive a variety of requests. The most common are the supply chain, the seed to sale, for example, the provenance where products are coming from, and every step of the way the transaction is logged on the blockchain. There is also any kind of registry, so land registry, a registry of iOS devices. There is insurance. There's also health records and where the patients can give their consent to the user of their data. There is also music royalties, for example, where you have a smart contract. All the ecosystem is on the smart contract, and there is who produced the music and all the other entities, including the DJ that is playing, and all the others are paid automatically.
So for Odem, the contracts that we currently have on the mainnet are basically registries, since our goal is to facilitate education. We have registries of events and registries of outcomes of those events. So we basically have just multiple registries of things occurring, and we rely on the fact that those things will be immutable for hopefully ever. That's how we use them.
So, that's great and fascinating, and the academic in me cannot resist but look to the future. So we have seen a lot of experiences with the issues that happened and different hacking and a lot of issues that would go with how tokens would be burned and you cannot get access to them and parity hack and all of that. So in the next, like just 2 minutes, maybe a quick look into where we are going with all the smart contracts.
So I think the next logical step for smart contracts is to do what Wix and Squarespace has done with website development. We want to be able to allow everyone in the world to create a smart contract to handle whatever task needs to be done using a simple drag and drop methodology. How soon are we going to get there? I think there's some projects that are putting that like within a 2-year scope. But again, that may be something that's 10 years out, but I think when that happens, the way people communicate and do business worldwide and for generations will fundamentally change.
I think what Aaron said about that drag and drop aspect that we're going to be going towards is absolutely right. And I think the biggest impact that smart contracts are going to have over the next 10 years is going to be in the legal space. I think, so let's say if I buy a house from someone, I have to pay lawyers to go over sets of paperwork, check it's all, you know. Then, if I want to sell a house 2 months later, more lawyers have got to go through it all over again, potentially even the same lawyers going over the same paperwork. It's madness. And I think smart contracts that are self-executing are ultimately going to take a real chunk out of the legal profession, especially when there could be online libraries to put together your own legal contracts in a drag-and-drop manner. And I think there's going to be a real move towards making legal contracts more accessible and more smarter.
Where we're going in the long term, in 2030, 2040, 2050, is total automation. However, society out there is not ready for total automation, but smart contracts have characteristics which can enable this total automation. So a smart contract, you cannot pull the plug on a smart contract, you cannot change it, you cannot debate about what is in the code, and it runs and it auto enables the functionality within it. So those are key characteristics that, together with the blockchain, are unique. So 10 years ago, Satoshi gave us the trust in storage. Like smart contracts gave us the trust in the automation, in the computability. And with these two items, we can achieve total automation, but this will take 20, 30 years.
So yeah, I understood that. I would answer this from a bit more of a technical level. I suspect in the future, obviously, there's a very clear need for different consensus algorithms so that we can speed things up. The confirmation rates are basically too slow to do any high transaction volumes. And there are solutions today that are trying to solve this, but they're not built into the chains, right? And I suspect that we'll see more and more of things like EOS and Eternity and these alternative solutions that are fundamentally trying to speed things up with different takes on the consensus algorithms. I suspect we'll also need to see some better storage solutions as well. At the moment, storing data on the blockchain is relatively difficult, and it requires you to jump through a bunch of crypto hoops to actually link off-chain storage solutions to the on-chain ones. And fundamentally, we need to fix this because this is just, it's too messy to deal with, basically. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for a lovely discussion here. Kindly please help me upload them. Thank you.